Hey, what's up, lightboltjoe here. Today we are going to discuss Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street. Came out April 5th, 2019, directed by Roman Cimenti, I can't say names, and Tyler Jensen. So this is there's 100% Rotten Tomatoes. Mark Patton produced this, but he's also like, this is his documentary, and it's all about him getting into the film industry, but as getting into the celebrity aspect, but also like making of A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, the aftermath of A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, the gay plot points of it, the homophobia that was in Hollywood, the AIDS epidemic from 1985 and onwards, the just constant homophobia that he received throughout his entire life. His personal life, like, this was hard to watch. This was very hard to watch. This touched on so many personal levels as a gay horror fan. This was very difficult to watch. I got choked up so many times. How long was this? 100 minutes long? So we've talked about Mark playing Jesse. We've talked about the legacy that A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 has within the gay community, within the horror community, that it's much more appreciated now than it was then. There was just constant beratement that Mark received, but also, you know, throughout. It's just weird watching it all put into perspective, like how homophobic Hollywood was, and still kind of is, but it's slowly been transitioning, and those that remain from that time period, Mark, for instance, you know, he was sick for a very, very long time, and he left Hollywood for many, many years. He dealt with a lot of personal issues, he dealt with a lot of health issues, and he's now back better than ever, healthier and stronger than ever, telling his story, confronting individuals who, you know, made it worse for him, or he assumed made it worse for him. Like that last sit-down interview with the writer of the second film, David, like, it was very important for Mark to talk to David and to just get closure on that chapter, and having the reunion of the cast members and the director of Nightmare on Elm Street 2 getting to sit down and discuss the film, and you know, who knew about the subtext, who was unaware, who, you know, just things, right? It was very interesting watching it. It was interesting getting Mark's backstory, just hearing him tell his story, how he survived, and that it's because of him and that generation of folk in the mid 80s, you know, in Hollywood, dealing with all of this stuff, penalizing anyone who's gay, for that matter. It brought us to where we are now, very different. So it's important to note, like, all of the extremely famous influencers via TikTok and Instagram right now, like, doing their thing, and they're out and they're proud, and they're making a shit ton of money by promoting their own products and all these things, but it's because they have this market, they have this opportunity to actually do this, to actually go through with it. And of course everybody's going to hate you for one reason or another, but it's very different now. It's more commercialized now than it was then. Being gay, being queer, being in the LGBTQ plus community, it's commercialized, it's marketable, but back then, you know, 30 something years ago, it wasn't a thing. It was a disease. So it's always hard hearing someone's story who actually lived through something. Doesn't matter the context, but hearing Mark talk about all of the horrors that he went through, the joys and the horrors that he went through, it was very hard watching it. Very difficult watching it. I was very happy to see the cast from Freddy's Revenge come together, you know, at a con. But there was a documentary in 2010 that came out. I think it was called Never Sleep Again. I don't remember what it was called, but it was a documentary on the making of every single Nightmare on Elm Street film, all 8 films up to that time, and it's like 7.5 hours long. It's a very long documentary. I watched it once, and then I watched the Friday the 13th documentary, which is another multiple hours long thing. We are not watching them again to review them, just because they are so long, and it's the making of each film, basically. But the most important making of the Nightmare on Elm Street films is the second one. So to have Mark come back specifically to do interviews for that documentary in 2010, and then him going through different things than people remembering and like elevating Freddy's Revenge to a cult status. You know, he's now has that celebrity again within that Scream Queen horror community. He's the final boy. He's not a final girl. So it's he even talks about it, you know, via a podcast on this. You know, it's amazing. Looking at the last 5 years. This came out in 2019, so you know, still last 5 years worth of stuff. And how everything has changed and how much appreciation people have for it now compared to when it came out. Things change, you know, people change. It's important to have conversations with people to get closure on certain things. Like, Mark is an inspiration, and it's just really cool seeing his story told by him. Very important. On a different note, I loved the music in this movie. Whoever did the soundtrack for this, awesome. Great add-on to this documentary. Mark was very lucky in the beginning, and he got the short end of the stick at the very end, in the middle, and then now he's back. And he even says it, like, it's great to see, like, if you just Google Mark Patton, like, all these positive advocate, you know, queer community stuff comes up within the horror genre, and then all of the hatred visceral that he received all those years ago is very low down deep. You got to dig for it. So it's nice to see that the conversation has changed. And that's the point, that things change. Conversations can change things. And it's important to have a conversation here and there about certain things that bother people. A couple years ago, I put a post up about, it was just a mashup of all of Mark's screams in Freddy's Revenge, because I love Mark as Jesse. I always loved Mark as Jesse. I never understood why people hate him. I mean, I understand now why people hate him, but when I was younger and I watched it and seeing this gay subtext and, you know, discovering my own orientation, he as Jesse was a big focal point for a lot of our developments, now that we're all looking back at it, especially as horror fans. But like, I always was enamored because I could never scream like that, and I had no idea how he could scream like that. So I put a post up saying, you know, forever our Scream Queen. I think it was like on Instagram, and Mark had commented on it, so I was messaging him just very briefly, just saying, you know, I love his work. I'm really happy to see, you know, that this documentary was coming out. And here I am 2 years later finally watching it, but like, I'm amazed at his story. I'm really happy to see that he is telling his story. I'm happy that he's going to cons again. I'm happy I'm happy to say that I never hated the second film. I know so many people who still don't like that film, but that is my favorite Friday, Nightmare on Elm Street. Still, after watching, how many things did we watch? This is the 22nd film in our Friday the 13th / A Nightmare on Elm Street marathon. I'll consider the Goldbergs episode of Mr. Knifey Hands a film. But 22. I gotta check off Goldbergs. But Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street. It's the 22nd thing. We're done with our marathon. I wanted to end off on this high, but also keep it all chronological. So 2018 was the Goldbergs episode. 2019 was Mark Patton's Scream Queen doc. Man, as a gay horror fan, it was very hard watching this film just because you associate so much with what everyone was saying. But again, it's a community. It's forever you're not alone, because there are people literally just like you who like the same stuff you like and who can talk to you about what you want to talk about and not think that you're strange, because we all like the same horror films. Very important film. I completely understand why this has 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. Yeah, I'd love to meet Mark one day. One of my dream meetings. That would be fun. Just to thank him in person. Mark, you're awesome. You've always been awesome. Thank you for surviving. That's the best way to say this. Thank you for surviving. Thank you for giving us Jesse. Thank you for giving us this doc. Thank you for forever being our Scream Queen, our final boy. Mucho mahalo.